Founders Day. We will be in conversation with 4 inspiring and amazing women to discuss what they have founded, how their practices are voices for evolution in the profession, and what their experiences as women have been like. We will have 2 sessions. Each session will be 45 minutes with a 5-minute break in between. And then we will follow this with a time for questions that can be added to the chat, and we'll engage through that way. So we look forward to hearing from you at the end of the event. Thank you. And now to Kate Diamond.
So I am absolutely delighted to be here with you. In thinking about this and giving an introduction to this 100-year anniversary of AWA plus D, I was thinking about finding the right balance between enthusiasm for how far we have come and some degree of depression because we still have significant hurdles to overcome, and deep worry about the political context that's challenging women's right to choose that affects all of us in our lives. I'm old enough that my high school counselor literally told me that I couldn't become an architect because architecture was a male profession. Needless to say, I didn't go back to talk to her very much after that first comment. I'm old enough that I remember that my partner, Margot Siegel, told the story that yes, please. That my partner, Margot Siegel, told the story that AWA published a list of the people who essentially would be willing to consider hiring.
Kate, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Okay, am I unmuted now, Sonia?
Yes.
Okay, so going back to her stories, my partner told the story that the AWA used to publish a list of the firms in Los Angeles that would consider hiring a woman. When I interviewed, and I was a good 15 years younger than Margot, I interviewed 3 times with a firm, and they told me they couldn't hire me because I was too experienced and they'd have to put men working under my supervision, and that wouldn't work. Today, we know that more than 50% of the students in schools of architecture are women, but we also know that it's less than 17% of the registered architects across the country. So we're making progress, but progress is often really slow and frustrating, and recognition of what is going on is really challenging. And I think that women in architecture in multiple organizations have really been finding the need to talk to each other more extensively than they did through the kind of 90s and early 2000s. AWA was an extraordinary part of my personal life and history. I found out about AWA less than 2 weeks after I came back from Israel to the United States in 1979. There was an ad or a small piece in the paper that said that the Association for Women in Architecture was having an organizing event for an exhibit they were putting together. And really amazing chance, I went to the address where they were holding that. As it turns out, I was the only volunteer who showed up. So I had a really great chance to meet a recent UCLA graduate who took me off to wonderful parties at with her friends who are all recent graduates. And one of those friends, Pat Oliver, who's now dean at the University of Houston School of Architecture, introduced me to Norma Sklarek, where she was working at Gruen, and it became clear that the AWA was a place to make friends, to meet people who could open doors and make connections. When I found a place to work back then, I was the only woman, the first woman they had ever hired with an architectural degree. I was the only woman in the office other than the admin staff. And they were all kind of uncomfortable. And AWA was my shelter and my connectivity. And I have made friends that have lasted decades, 40 years plus. And I'm sure I'll forget lots of them, but I think about Ginger Tansman and Ann Zimmerman, Alicia Rosenthal, who won an AWA scholarship, Aline Winderman, who, you know, has shown such leadership at West Hollywood and other places, Stephanie Rice. A whole bunch of these women have worked for me at various points in time and then gone to become clients or folks at cities across the table. I'm still enthusiastically Facebook friends with Barbara Elwood and can't wait to see her when we can go back together. At the time, I think half of Siegel, Sklarek, Diamond staff were AWA members, recruited through the connections that we had at AWA. And I also think that there was a point in time when I was recruiting for AWA, every woman I met anywhere, any place with a connection to architecture or the associated design skills, I would recommend that she join AWA. And it was just this rich, extraordinary place where you could go for some consciousness raising, where you could go for support, where you could go for really good career advice, where you could explore and be celebrated in the safest possible context for presentation. And there are key events that stand out in my memory. The first Julia Morgan colloquium that we organized, Diane Favreau was key to that when she was at UCLA. I can still remember fighting with Julie Eisenberg, who was less than comfortable with the question of whether exploring women in architecture was important. We became best of friends and have continued the conversation for years. I remember hosting the National AIA Women in Architecture exhibit and enriching it with our own local exhibit of her story and successes. I remember the gingerbread house event that was gingerbread houses designed by architects and produced by women chefs and sold for auction. And I remember a Founders Day event presentation at the Wiltern where Brenda Levin and Margot Siegel and Weena Dowes presented amazingly different career paths and success stories and meaningful connections and motivated all of us. For me, I learned about leadership at the AWA. I was president from 1985 to 1987, and I was active for years. I was encouraged by Ginger to leave the comfort of being an employee, and I found my partners, Margot and Norma, through the AWA and through the AIA. We together became the largest wholly woman-owned architectural practice in the United States. I don't think we would have done it were it not for the connections and the encouragement of AWA breaking glass ceilings. I became the first woman AIA president in AIA Los Angeles' 99-year history, and then have been delighted to see that Ginger and many others followed after me. I'm still disappointed that I am currently the only woman design principal at HDR, now recognized as a design director and a vice president. But I got to tell you that I'm really tired of being the first or the only. I really hope that this celebration, and one of the wonderful things about AWA plus D has been that it's not just about architecture, it's about all kind of alternative, related, and amazing career paths and it's about men who are feminists and want to support women in these professions. So whether it's artists like Barbara Elwood, or activists like Ann Zimmerman, or amazing landscape architects like Katie Spitz, these have been the heart of my connections in Los Angeles. And I think at this point in time, it's a place for mentoring, it's a place for helping other women succeed, and it's a place for celebrating women's success. I want to remind everyone that her stories get lost all the time. Julia Morgan wasn't the only woman architect practicing in California. She was simply the only one who had large enough commissions to be recognized as part of the male canon of architectural history. And I want to thank everyone who was part of advocating for her posthumously getting the gold medal, specifically Julia Donahoe and Beverly Willis, who fought for years at the AIA to get that recognition. Mostly, I want all of us to think about how will women remember AWA plus D's history, her story, 100 years from now, and how each of us need to become part of the change we want. I think we have great opportunities to build on a strong foundation, playing architect, and to take this to the next level of exploration for how we change the relationship between family, between our personal lives and our professional lives, how we elevate and get recognition and opportunities for all. And I'm really happy and delighted to be part of this celebration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for all these amazing stories. And for sure, one thing that stayed, a lot of things stayed consistent, but one thing for sure, that the support that this group gives to each other definitely stayed consistent. I'm just going to quickly welcome everyone that just joined in before I hand it off to Lori. So hello, everyone. My name is Sona Givorkin. I am the president of AWA Plus D this year. And I just wanted to welcome you to one of the biggest events that we put together, celebrating 100 years, just in case you haven't noticed. And I just realized today that about 100 years ago, when this group just started, we also had another pandemic. So I'm pretty sure that they also use Zoom to throw events together. But I wanted to thank you and welcome you to this event. Thank you for joining. If you are a member, thank you for being a member. Thank you for your support. And if you're not a member yet, I hope you consider to become a member. We have a lot of really great programs put together for you. I also wanted to give a special thanks to our sponsors who are so generous and supportive. And they are GGA Plus, Pacific Crest Consultants, Park Construction, IBI Group, Atomic Irrigation, Tracy A. Stone Architect, and June Tang Photography. And with that, I would like to pass it to Lori to continue the program.
Thank you so much. So we're going to be switching the sessions that you see up on the screen. So we're going to begin with Elizabeth Timmy and Heidi Crichton, and so we're going to be in conversation, and I'll give just a very brief introduction to both of them as you see the names through the screen. But Elizabeth Timmy, co-founder of Office by Office, and now L.A. Moss, who's invested in public and civic planning practice that is very centered on community engagement and community empowerment. And Heidi Crichton is associate principal at Bureau Happold, an architect, and has been in the sustainability consulting area for at least about 16 years. And as she described herself, as a sustainability geek. So we're going to be talking about their roles working in environment and in regenerative design. So I want to begin with the first question for you to discuss and talk about is within these areas that you're both operating of the environment and sustainability and social equity. Can you speak to these scales of engagement that your work engages with and you're involved with, and how did you arrive at this type of work and scale of work?
Elizabeth, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think that's a really good question. And for me, I grew up around architecture, and the idea of paper architecture or speculative projects wasn't so interesting to me. It also felt very white male dominated. It felt like a very privileged space. And the idea that paper projects had value seemed to be a bit farcical. And also I came of age at the height of a lot of perversion around automated systems and the idea that computer generated architecture in and of itself was valuable, even though there was a lot of ambivalence about the people and the community that would be really receiving that work. And we talked about community members or people living in projects as users. We talked about design as systematized. And so it felt very unpersonalized, and it felt as though the heart of architecture and design had been removed, and architecture felt very destabilized as a student. And looking for the real value and interest in architecture, I had to really put a lot of what I had learned to the side and try to forge my own path, which is why I started an organization, because I really cared deeply about engaging and speaking with and understanding others' needs, but also their kind of inherent vitality, and wanting to support that in whatever way I could. And for me, that meant through architecture, but if I hadn't found architecture, it would have been something else.
Lori, thanks for the brief introduction, but I actually have some really good news. I was promoted to principal just 2 days ago. So it's my first time saying that out loud, I think. So really happy to share that with this particular group. So that's really exciting. And, thanks, Kate, for your introduction. I was much more fortunate growing up. I was never told no. I was told architecture is a crazy industry to go into, but I was never told no because I'm a woman. So I had a lot of support, and, as Kate mentioned too, was surrounded by women in architecture school. And, actually I've always had really great women mentors throughout my career. So I've had a huge amount of support, but yeah, I studied architecture and actually got my sustainability education in my first job. I was actually fortunate to work on one of the first LEED projects in Manhattan. So this is like early 2000s, and it was actually a paper submission, if you even knew that those existed for LEED. That's how long ago I started working on sustainability, and I was just thought it was just the coolest thing and just so important. So that project really influenced my career trajectory. So when I got the opportunity to jump over to the consulting side, I did that. So I've been doing sustainability consulting for a bit over 15 years now. I haven't looked back. It's been hugely rewarding and just really so fun to see kind of the breadth and the depth of sustainability and what's encompassed in that now. Or even, just looking back 10 years where it was really pretty just much focused on the environment and on LEED, and to think now about it, resiliency, social equity, health and well-being, everything. It's also interconnected, as you all know. So that's really exciting. And I don't know, Lori, if you wanted us to touch on what we've founded a little bit too. Should I go ahead and touch on that?
Yes.
So part of the reason I was invited to speak tonight was just a lot of the initiatives that I've that I've done kind of outside of work, but related to work, but the Collective Impact Speaker Series. So AWA plus D is a partner in that, and those are quarterly events. We've had 17 events so far. Our next one is next week, so hope you all can join us. Kate's actually going to be speaking along with Christina. And we've just had hundreds of speakers from close to 200 organizations talk about what they're most passionate around, sustainability and social equity. So they're really inspirational. So I hope you can join us for those. But those have been hugely valuable and hopefully really connecting people in meaningful ways. I'll pause there.
Thank you. So I was thinking, I mean, as part of these events are also about thinking about the future. And so I'd like for both of you to spend a little bit of time and talk about what you see or can imagine in the next 5 to 10 years in the future in terms of where you're both located, engaging both social equity and regenerative design and sustainability. Could you shed some light on where you think we're headed, and also your aspirations within this realm?
Well, I am trying not to be too dark. And how do I frame this in a way that's positive? It will be very hard to address the housing crisis. And there will be a lot of stress put on cities in our efforts to address it. And so there will be a lot of stress on our systems and also us as people and individuals. And I do think that as women, we will have to be juggling more than we already juggle, which will be really hard. And we'll have to find new models of resilience that begin with us having more resilient communities and being more community tied and community focused. Because I suspect that we will be in, as we have always been, kind of linchpins of stability and support in projects that rely on a kind of fluidity and organic responsiveness to changing situations, and a lot of flexibility. And so I expect that it will be really hard to choose between supporting our families or the lives that we've been able to create for ourselves and the work that we'll be called to do in response to a lot of the systems that are failing across every city. And we'll have to make those kind of choices for ourselves, and it'll be hard. And I hope that we can support each other. And I hope that our communities and the communities we're in are more diverse, socioeconomically and racially, so that we are supporting those who are most marginalized and impacted by the stress that's affecting the future.
I totally second everything you just said, Elizabeth. That was a great response. Yeah, I mean, I think, we've demonstrated that we can design, build, and operate net zero energy, water, waste buildings. Of course, we still have a long way to get there for all of our buildings to get there, right? But the policies, the codes are coming, right? Like 2030 is a pretty hard line in the sand for achieving those goals. So really agree with Elizabeth. We really need to focus on resiliency and on social equity, right? We can't just be sustainable, right? We need to be regenerative. We need our built environment to be giving back and not just taking. And I think our role as designers too is to really think along the entire supply chain and everyone that's impacted by our decisions, using healthy materials as an example, right? Making sure that the materials that we're specifying and using in our projects, what's their impact on the communities where those materials might be being extracted? Are they toxic materials? Who's touching those throughout manufacture? Who's breathing the air when when it's in place, and then what happens too at end of life with those materials. So healthy materials can have a huge impact by being natural, organic, non-toxic, and not plastic based, basically. So there's just so much work to be done in that space. And then Elizabeth too just talked about those that are impacted by these shocks and stressors, right? And we've all seen the tabloids about those who are impacted by climate change, those who are impacted by things like the pandemic, right? It's those marginalized communities, it's people of color, it's women, it's children. So we've got a lot of good work to do in that space to make our built environment much more resilient and much more equitable.
I was thinking about Kate's comment about both excitement and frustration to be continuing some of these conversations, and thinking about Elizabeth's comments about how do we choose and making decisions that are family centered, maybe in not against, but in comparison to, say, community and environment. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how, reflecting on what you've been able to accomplish thus far in your careers, how has being a woman furthered or enabled these efforts, and or created challenges for you? I know, Heidi, you mentioned you've never felt encumbered because of your gender, but I'm curious, within the space that we're in tonight, how do you think about and evaluate what you've been able to do so far within the context of being a woman in a discipline that's still inherently white and male? So although it's fantastic, people have not felt encumbered, there are many of us who have. So if you could speak to that a bit, please.
Do you want me to go first? Sorry, we didn't decide who's gonna take which one first. I'll take this one first, Elizabeth, so you can think about it. And yeah, that's not to say that I've never felt encumbered. I definitely have. I'm sure you've all experienced where you walk up to a meeting or log into a virtual meeting and you're the only woman in the room, right? And just feeling intimidating like by that, and having the confidence to sit at the table and to be a voice and to be heard, and not just be the note taker, right? Or have the roles that are more subservient. And so that's been a challenge for me, and I'm sure that resonates with a lot of you and what you've experienced too. I think that the AIA, LA, and AWA plus D, came together for the Powerful Symposium series. That was hugely inspiring for me. All of those have been, and those have been going on for many years. But just to hear the stories of others, to celebrate the work of others, to see the data, right? The missing 32%. I think Kate referenced that statistic earlier on of the number of female licensed architects. And just really understanding what those barriers are and how do we create better policies and mechanisms, more flexibility, whatever it's needed, to make sure that women can thrive in our industry. It's so important. More diverse teams create better outcomes and more creative solutions for the projects. So it's hugely important that we support that diversity. And my hope is that clients will start to demand more and more that disadvantaged business enterprises are required to be part of project teams. On a lot of public RFPs, that's a requirement, but when we're putting together teams, we try to go above and beyond, or even when it's not listed as a requirement, to incorporate more diverse consultants onto our teams.
I'm happy to get into the numerous ways in which I didn't consider myself. I don't wake up in the morning and look at my boobs and think I'm a woman. I wake up as a person, like I am sure, you know, every person on the planet does, unless, well, many of us. And so I'm happy to get into the ways in which that I it's been brought up to me, or I've been reminded that I'm not seen that way. However, the numbers of Black licensed architects, female licensed architects are appalling. Pacific Islander, female, or, you know, female identifying architects are appalling. And I think I didn't consider myself a white, or I didn't consider myself a feminist or a female architect because I don't primarily spend time in those spaces. And so I felt that the conversation around female architecture wasn't one that I had something to add to necessarily. And so groups like NOMAS and DAP, I've been very inspired by the work that they're doing and really excited to do whatever I can to be an ally. Because the feelings that I have had and the ways that being excluded from different systems, how I've brushed up against that, I've avoided it because of my class and my socioeconomic status. And I've had privilege, and I haven't had to structurally have my life impaired because of my privilege. And so the ways that I'm reminded that I'm excluded are enough and slight, but jarring enough that I have always wanted to dedicate my life to supporting people who have that happen to them constantly. It's not a very good response, and it's a bit wishy-washy, but it's both, right? Like, and I'm sure I'm wrong and awkward in how I'm explaining it.
No, I really appreciate it. Heidi, were you gonna?
Yeah, I just had one other thought as Elizabeth was talking. You know, just in some of the leadership training that I've gone through, you know, leading with empathy has been like a really core message in the training. But I gave the feedback recently to some of the partners at BH that I said, but I don't see empathy being rewarded. I see people bringing in project work being rewarded, but you're telling us in the training you want us to be empathetic leaders, but you're not. That's not coming up in our annual reviews, and it's not being recognized, it's not being rewarded. So that's something that a lot of the women in my practice have discussed, of really probably historically really leaned into mentoring much more than our male counterparts. And then in some cases even mentoring somebody and then they rise through the ranks more quickly than we might, and some frustrations there, but how important kind of being a listener and being there for the staff and really caring about staff has been. So just wanted to share that about the empathy piece. I thought that was interesting that we're being asked to do that, but not recognized for it.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious what the response was in terms of thinking about kind of structural change around that within a firm like Borough Happle.
I think it's still a conversation that people I gave feedback to want to put a pin on it and have a further conversation about it. So I'll hopefully be having more conversations about that specifically, Lori, but just making sure that everything through, you know, recruitment to annual reviews to promotions to bonuses, that everything is kind of scrutinized and how we do things currently, because there are biases, right? I mean, if you just look at the data, it shows that there are biases. So we need to change our process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Elizabeth, I wanted to return back to, I really appreciate your comments and your thoughts and the shift, the way you are shifting the conversation. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk about your work in relationship to the comments you made in response to the question, and how that through your own practice and engagement with the community, you are doing these things. I don't know how aware people are of the work you're doing, but I would like to hear more about that.
Sure. So I co-founded LA Moss, and that was around nearly 10 years ago. And that was an urban design nonprofit at the time of it being founded. And within about 2 years, I decided to go into a co-executive leadership model with the current executive director, Helen Leung, and the two of us did a lot of projects around alternative scales of neighborhood development. And we then went on to kind of coalesce those into programs. And a lot of those programs, the heart of those programs was community engagement and trying to do kind of grass tops community engagement to bolster and support neighborhoods. And then in the pandemic, we shifted towards, and really before the pandemic, we were having conversations about wanting to be grassroots. And so we shifted during the pandemic to being place-based and only working in Elysian Valley in Northeast LA, and really doing mutual aid projects. And it was during that time that we really got much deeper into community organizing. And in the last 6 months, we have kind of restructured to be 2 separate organizations, one that's going to be doing the community-based work of organizing and building capacity locally to have residents in Northeast LA have a community-based organization where they're leading and owning the call to action around housing, and they have the capacity to ask and have clarity around what they want. And then for Office of Office, the design-based organization to be able to support and facilitate and assist in that. And so that model is one that as designers and architects, we're going to be replicating in partnerships with other community-based organizations and using architecture as an assistance tool and a method of support for communities in that kind of grassroots way rather than grass tops. So it all evolved, and I would say it all kind of changed every 3 to 4 years what we were doing, but it was really trying to get deeper into the heart of emerging needs rather than kind of supplying the demand for architecture.
One thing I find super fascinating about the pairing of you two is because you may be working at different scales, but I think there's a lot of intersecting goals and aspirations that you're both bringing to your work. And Heidi, I was wondering, I don't know how long ago that project was for the LA County Sustainability Plan, but I was thinking about that, your project, as Elizabeth was talking about her grassroots effort. And I was wondering if you would be willing just to share a little bit of that, because I think these two provide really interesting examples of how at different scales you're thinking about networks and community in interrelated ways.
Sure, yeah. So as Lori just mentioned, we helped the Chief Sustainability Office for the County of Los Angeles develop the first countywide sustainability plan for the region. Hopefully you all know about it, but it's our county. But what was really important to us was the CBO engagement, the community-based organizations. So we actually, in our proposal, when we were bidding for the project, we carved out funding to compensate the CBOs because we felt it was so important that they be compensated for their work. So that they were able to really lean into the process. They helped us develop content for the stakeholder engagement that we were doing. They helped us get out the word, and it was hugely helpful because we were able to collect many, I think we collected over 6,000 community comments, and those directly were folded into the goals and strategies of the plan. So we were just, it was just like a key tenet of our approach and process, but also too for the county, equity and resiliency. They wanted to embed in every single thing that we we were looking at. So they didn't want kind of a separate chapter on those topics, right? They wanted that those themes to be embedded in all of the goals that we developed.
It's fantastic. In our preparation for the event this evening, we met in small groups beforehand, a few weeks before. And one of the things we were discussing, and I'm going to bring it forward because I think it's important, is how becoming a mother has impacted your ability to do the kinds of work you want to do. And I want to just preface that I don't know how many of you, when you were students, ever talked to someone or had a professor who would talk about this, but someone who's now located only in the academy, who never had that conversation, and I really wish someone would have. I think it's really important that our younger generations coming through start to think about how do you plan for and navigate our careers if and how you want to have a family, because that is a really important thing to have to think about and to plan for. So I'm hoping you will be willing to talk a little bit about how you've been able to navigate your career with children, and how that potentially has shifted and involved your thinking just as a practicing architect.
Okay, I'll dive in. Yeah, so yeah, I've got two kids. Luckily, when I got pregnant with my first, I was working for a working mom. And so she really went to bat and advocated for me, so that when I did become a mom, that I reduced my hours to 32 hours, and that was fine with everybody. And then when I changed and moved into, so that was at Davis Langdon at the time. And then when I moved into Bureau Happold, I was able to maintain that because that was something that I had. So I was able to carry that forward. And so, yeah, I was compensated for 32 hours up until the very beginning of the pandemic. So I think it was good. I was one of the only employees at both of my previous firm and current firm who was doing this. I really wish it was much more widespread because so many people, life is complex and people, have others that they're helping care for. If it's their parents or other family members or children. So to have more flexibility is hugely helpful. So just to be able to demonstrate to all my colleagues that I could, take on a lot of responsibility, be work winning, be running big projects, but also have a family and be able to balance that. I don't know. Work-life balance is like, I don't know if I don't ever feel like I'm in balance really, but did feel really good about that. But yeah, a couple of years ago, my boss came to me and he had asked me multiple times throughout the years, when are you coming on full time? When are you coming on full time? And I'd always push back. And I was like, oh, I feel like, the 32 hours allowed me to drop off my kids at school in the morning and then be home in time for dinner. So I basically took a 20% pay cut to be able to pull that off. But when my boss approached me at the beginning of 2020, it was really wonderful because he said, you're providing more value than we're paying you for. And the best thing I can do is for you to come on full time. He said, how many hours are you working every week? Is it closer to 40? And I said, yes. And he said, you should be compensated for that. So, and then I told him, I said, but if I come in at 40 hours, I feel like I'm going to have to work closer to 50 hours. And I don't think I can, I can't fit 10 more hours into my schedule. And he said, I'm not telling you have to work 50 hours. You're telling yourself that. And he said, I want you to do what you're doing right now, and I want you to be appropriately compensated. So I was just really touched by him doing that for me and opening my eyes and showing me that I really should be compensated for the work that I was doing. But I think you know, at least for me, and I imagine I've heard this from other women too, I think we often feel like we need to do more than our male colleagues to come and prove ourselves. So it was a good lesson, but now I'm getting better compensated for the value I'm providing. So yeah, it was like, it was good, but it was also too like, oh, was I for years potentially cheating myself out of some compensation that I probably should have been getting. So that was a lot of sharing I just did.
Oh, that was such a great story, because I think even though I've founded 2 organizations, I still feel really guilty, and I'm always apologizing for whenever I have to put my family first. And so I think it's really awesome to hear of people showing you empathy and not, and being really clear about the fact that you have value, because yeah, being a mother and an architect, it's not as though I heard any discussions about that, right? There's a lot of things that aren't discussed. So, but yeah, I also, it's hard to talk about it without also just saying, I feel like I have all these disclaimers, so my apologies, but that there's so many people who want to be mothers and who can't, or so many people who had that as a life plan and then they're not doing that, or people who don't want that and feel it's just as hard to be in your 30s and your 40s and to be in this age where you wanted to accomplish more, and you're kind of pivoting from being an architect that's too young to know what you're talking about in a meeting, and then suddenly you're too old to be considered someone who, you know, has the kind of the chutzpah or whatever to kind of lead that project, or to kind of come in from left field with like to get some work opportunity, or to grow into a different area of work. And so I think that as women, the thing that kind of sucks sometimes, and I find that maybe this is worse being a mother, is there's a certain kind of rigidity to the work that it's seen that you should be doing. And, you know, as an aside, I also, you know, there was this substantial amount of time that I really sucked as a mentor, because I was raising 2 small people, and I would come in and have employees, and I didn't want to have to come in and also parent my employees. And I don't like, it's, you know, I think it's really hard when you're in that situation to not also think of your employees as children, and then everything just feels really claustrophobic. And so to be really honest, there was a very substantial amount of time where I was a very bad boss, because I just wanted to get away from all of those responsibilities. And yet I had structured my life to have a certain amount of momentum, because I was very scared to be a mother as an architect. And I was very scared that I would lose some perception of like autonomy in my career over it. That being said, I have 3 kids, and I also had no surviving parents to help me. And so there was an immense amount of support that I had from my partner and my community in doing that. And there was a lot of mistakes that were made as a parent, and a lot of things that I would do differently, and things that I would have prioritized differently. And this is life. So, you know, you just kind of make mistakes, and then you just kind of keep living, hopefully. God, I'm really nihilistic today. I really apologize.
Don't apologize. I think it's so, thank you so much for both of you sharing these, because I think as Kate had mentioned, you know, when the stories of women have not been included, and these are part of our stories, it is really important to understand how women practice architecture and are able to have lives outside of architecture that fulfill them and enrich the practices that they create. So for me, it was so empowering to hear these stories as someone who had hoped to have children and was unable to. So I think it's, you know, there are all types of us out here, And it's just, I really want to thank you for being willing to share that. And I guess if you had advice for women who are contemplating some of these things in the audience, are there things you would want them to hear, to take away tonight in relationship to these challenges that we all have faced?
I think my biggest piece of advice would be to make sure that you love what you do. We spend too much time working to not love it. So make sure that the work you're working on, the organization that you're working with or for, is really good alignment with your core values. I think that's of utmost important. And, you know, the economy is doing really well right now. People are hiring. Kate's hiring. She even posted that in the chat. So if you don't feel good alignment right now, listen to your gut and make a change. Or if you're really happy, then absolutely, then just that's great and lean into it.
My parents were hippies, and so they were like, if you really love what you do, everything's gonna work out. And I like love that, but also don't know if that's real, and I don't know what's real anymore. So I think that's true. If you hate your job, you should feel the freedom to not be an architect, because I haven't felt like an architect. I can't call myself an architect. I lost all my IDP hours when both my parents died, and I didn't report within 6 months. I lost 3 years of IDP. And I worked for a firm that I won't name that I hated working for so that I could get those hours. So, and now I don't think I'll ever get my licensure, even though when I speak at the AIA, they put AIA after my name. So just do like, and I purposefully did this thing that people have told, when we got emerging architects, I was told that they had a huge fight because there was like 2 people that wouldn't say yes because they said it wasn't architecture. So I think feeling the freedom that if you have a job that you don't love, or if you don't feel like you see yourself in what you're doing, and you're having trouble knowing who you are at that point and knowing, you know, your values, then I think you should feel okay with not being an architect and doing what you need to do to understand what your value is and feel good about it.
Yeah. I think there's also, I mean, I think in both of your careers, you are also expanding the way we understand architecture being practiced and its application more broadly. So I think there's also how does the discipline evolve to engage and take on some of these the most pressing issues of our time. So I think it's a give and take. Also, it's the labels have to be more expandable and fluid as our expertise and our engagement with these things also has to become more fluid. So I think I would hate to, you know, I don't want to go into a conversation of how do we define what an architect is, but I think there's room there, I think, for negotiation and expansion. I mean, I think also both of you in different ways have talked about in the previous question about how work parameters, you've been able to negotiate and thus then change the parameters of how you work. And I think that's incredibly important for people to hear and for us to think about, because from a very early start in our education, we think to practice architecture requires almost losing your life to being at the drawing table, as it were. But I think both of you have shown and discussed ways that you have been able to structure your lives in ways that allow you to do these different things. I think that's so important to hear. And I think it's really important for the future of how we think about practice becoming more inclusive and engaging different ways we think about community and family. So those are the way you've talked about your own life experiences clearly demonstrate there is that potential and malleability within the way practices have evolved. And I think COVID has shown us all that there are many ways and places to be practicing. And I think that hopefully will continue to push the discipline in ways that allow for more equity and more engagement with different life circumstances. We are almost up in this session, and so I wanted to leave the last words for both of you. If there's any other things you'd like to add before we have your session close.
I think, no, I mean, thank you so much, Lori and AWA. It's a privilege to be able to have a space to be able to share our experiences. And it makes the profession seem less insular and more inviting and personable. And I think it feels as though we all have the potential to get to be of service together, which is exciting. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Just thank you, AWA plus D, for putting this event together and including us. Thank you all for letting us share. And yeah, I mean, Kate shared some wonderful stories about this organization and who she met through it. And yeah, some of my closest friends I've met through organizations like AWA plus D throughout Southern California. So lean into those organizations. They're great support networks. They're great networking. And it's just a win-win. There's so many positives when you do volunteer and lean into these organizations. So thank you, AWA plus D.
Well, thank you both. It was really, I really enjoyed being in conversation with both of you, and your careers are so inspiring. And I look forward to hearing more about what happens moving forward. So we're going to take 5 minutes for a break, and then we'll be back for our second panel. You short, but we want to keep going. So I have the pleasure of being in conversation with Julie B. Ramirez, who is the founder and CEO of Pretty and Plastic Studios, and Emmanuel Bollier, who co-founded and now is the CEO of Panelite, who I had the amazing chance to actually call her in the very beginnings when she was a student at Columbia and I was a fledgling young architect in New York City. So I'm very excited to be in conversation with the two of you. I want to start because you both are women-owned businesses, and we had a really lively discussion in preparation for this. And I'd like for you to share with our audience how you began, how your company has transitioned over time, and the challenges you have faced in those transition periods.
Julie, do you want to start?
Yeah, why the hell not? So I began my company about 15 years ago. I came from a very science-based family, and I always loved the arts, but they were, oh, you can't go into the arts, you can't go into these creative fields, you have to go into biology or law or something like that. And so that was one of my inspiring forces with kind of figuring out how we can combine this science and art. And so I figured I started my company with that foundation to provide those services to folks in terms of fabrication and production. And we just evolved over time. I mean, it's very, very organic. It really wasn't planned. And we just adapted to the different challenges and the needs that we came across with artists and companies that came to us. And I think one of the things that we talked about in our discussion, our small discussion, was, some of the challenges that we face is when to scale and when not to scale and how to do that. And that was something that was very interesting. We both, Emmanuel and I both kind of faced these decisions to make, and different, at different points had grown to be a larger company and then decided to scale back and be more boutique. And it's still, honestly, it's still a challenge. I still face that, like, how big do I want to get? And then how do you, and again, thank you both for the earlier share. It was so inspiring, and your honesty was just so incredibly inspiring, because I'm have a hard time really opening up like that. But I really, really appreciate that. And yeah, it's one of those challenges of also being a mother, and you know, you want to be this really badass boss, but at the same time, you sacrifice so much in life and what's important. And I think we've all been thinking about that lately. So that's something that's on the forefront of my thoughts right now, and one of the challenges I'm facing, where to take it next.
We did have a very interesting pre-panel discussion, and I also really want to thank Heidi and Elizabeth for your really inspiring stories. In terms of how I founded the company, it was also very organic, unplanned process. I wanted to be an architect since I was about 8 years old. Mostly because I just had this sense that architecture had such a profound impact on people's lives. You know, that was the way to impact other people positively. And I personally was so affected by spaces and light quality in spaces, which is interesting because as I developed Panelite, that is really what we focus on. But I was still in graduate school for architecture and working with a classmate on a small project, a small commission, and we knew that we wanted to use a translucent honeycomb panel. And it was something that we thought already existed. And we called up all kinds of manufacturers asking them for samples, and they all said that they didn't make translucent honeycomb panels. So we got somebody to make us a prototype, and just seeing the quality of that material, the way it dealt with light, and it was so lightweight and so strong. It was like this magical material. And we just felt that it could have a use in architecture. We showed it to some of our peers, and my classmate at the time was working for the office of Mineo Brock in New York, and they amazingly, said, "Wow, let's put this in a project," which is an extraordinary chance to have given us. And once we had made some panels for one project, we started fielding other inquiries and just realized that we might really have something here. So I was still in my second year of grad school when we started the company, and I would come home. I was at Columbia at the time, and I would come home and we would make sample packs in my apartment, and it was 1998, so we had a landline and like a translucent iMac. And we've been through sort of a lot of expansion and some streamlining since then. I ended up moving to Los Angeles in 1999, and we kept 2 offices. I'm so sorry. I have a very affectionate cat, but he's a feminist, so he's participating. We grew quite steadily, but had to weather 2 downturns. So there was 2001, there was 2008, and we experimented with production of panels in-house. We shut that down in the 2008 downturn. It was just too much to manage, too much space, too many people. That was a difficult transition, going back to being a much smaller team. And now we're, during the pandemic, we're all working remotely. Everything is mostly outsourced, but we're very excited about the potential for honeycomb technology and its role in sustainability, because of how it can amplify daylighting, how it can optimize well-being, how it can reduce solar heat gain. Those are the things we're really focused on right now.
So when we were talking in before, one of the things that came up with both of you in relationship to starting businesses and the kind of expansion, contraction, and how do you scale the scale that you would like to be, and you both discussed issues around management approaches. And I would love for you, if you will, to share some of that in terms of how do you become a manager? What kind of manager do you see yourself as? What have been the challenges in becoming a manager of two very successful companies? And how do you navigate that?
Well, that is one of the largest challenges, I think, is personal relationships within a company, and being a good leader, but at the same time, you're the only person that's really going to care as much as you do about what you're doing. And how do you instill that in everyone else that you work with? And it's the idea that you're a team and that you want to bring out the best qualities in all these people that you bring in as a team, and to make them thrive. And I hope to do that in my company. I mean, we have so many women that work for us that I just hope to just help them hone their skills and bring that out and help them feel confident. And in the beginning, I micromanaged like crazy, constantly, always had eyes on everything. I knew how things needed to be done. And I've learned that this does quite the opposite. By micromanaging, you basically, you take that away from someone, and that you need to just instill confidence in them and the ability to think for themselves and make the mistakes. Not as many mistakes as I made, hopefully, and hopefully I can teach them from the mistakes I made and what I learned. But that's about it. I mean, it's really just leading and also being the trying to be the positive force that walks in every morning, and it's just always getting excited about the projects and the challenges ahead, because they deal with the day-to-day. And that's what I try to do on a daily, is just bring that excitement for what we do, because I love it so much and there's never a dull moment. And just bring that to the table, make them feel super confident, make people want to grow and learn more. And have the ability to do that on their own.
Can I interject, because this hasn't been said, but your team is all women, is that right, Julie?
We have a token male on our team as well. Just one though right now, maybe two right now, but the rest are women by no conscious decision necessarily, but it just happened to be that way. But yes, we're very female forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've always been female forward as well. We're about 70% women right now. And I feel as if I've learned, you learn as you go. And the two main things that I've learned about leadership over all this time, the first one is really just to trust my gut, because I have, you make some mistakes sometimes with a hire, or you have a feeling that something's not quite right, and maybe the culture's getting a little uncomfortable if someone doesn't quite fit in, or is, and you have to trust your gut when you see that. And I've gotten better at hiring because of that. And most of our team has been with us now for 10 years or more. But it's really, it's taken me a while to learn to trust my gut. And the other thing I've learned is, I grew up in a European family, and also the company is now 23 years old. And I always grew up thinking that you had to really separate business and private life, and you don't talk about your private life. I mean, when I first started, I worked in Europe where we called each other, by our formal names. Nobody even used first names. That was kind of what I came out of. And I've just learned, I really enjoy my team. And I've learned that the more human I am and the more I actually share, the better we work together and the more comfortable everybody is. But that was a lesson I had to learn, was that we all have our stories, and you can't leave yourself at home. That doesn't really work out so well.
In terms of say scaling, you both had mentioned wanting to grow, but then not sure, not clear on how big. And then you also had talked about possible succession plans. So I think it would be really interesting to hear a bit more about how, like, longevities of practices, of companies, of where you see yourself, where you'd like your company to go, and at what point would you like to step back from or lessen, your commitments, time commitments to it, as a way to maybe do other things. There was some discussion between the two of you about that I think would be good for the audience to hear.
Yeah, I think we were talking about that, and that's been the biggest challenge so far. That's like the one thing that I'm like asking for is I need to figure out how to do that. But it's just, it's been a challenge. I don't have many answers there, but I do know it's a necessity. And then I know Emmanuel said something amazing at one point. It's just like when we in our small discussion is sometimes you just have to take it. You just take the time you need. You take the balance that you need in your work, your work life balance, and everything else seems to kind of fall into place. So maybe with this idea of, eventually being able to step away and work on some more personal projects and be the inner artist that I've been squashing down this whole time. Maybe you just have to start walking away and trust that it will follow. Because I've searched for a replacement, and it's really hard thing to find. But maybe that's what I need to learn. And maybe I need to hear that from you here. So I don't know.
It is tough. I'll be honest, I'm getting a little tired. Like
Totally.
I've always worked really, really hard. Before I had my son, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I used to work, 7 days a week. And even after I had my son, he's 12 now, I still work really a lot. I think what I shared was that I finally, I started to skateboard, and that is what really, at first I thought, oh my God, I can't take time. I've got to stay focused. But once I started skateboarding, it actually changed the way I approached my work, and it brought more richness to my work and more joy to my life too. But it just made me a braver, more decisive person. So I thought, oh, well, maybe you don't have to be chained to your desk, to be good at what you do. I really learned something there. I'm hoping, I'd love for Panelite to be a huge success, because I think we can do a lot of good, both just in terms of bringing more and more innovative, sustainable material options to the world. But I'm also really hoping to build a culture that's a beautiful place for people to thrive and build a career. But I'd like to do all that and find a way to, cut my hours a little so that I can, there's some other projects I'm working on now that I'd love to be able to spend more time on. And right now, the only solution to that is to work extra hard. So yeah, I'm hoping to find a way to, I think it's a matter of growing to the point where I can delegate more and just be more of a, provide some creative direction and be a little less hands-on. I'm still very hands-on for a founder.
I love that you said when you started skateboarding that it made you more decisive and stronger in your business, because that I think is such a quality that you need. And that how do you cultivate that as a person, being decisive, and that you have to be decisive. That's just how, as a leader. So I loved hearing that. So now I'm going to take up like something, I don't know.
I recommend it.
Again, or something like that.
Another component that you both brought up was around intellectual property, and in part because Julie, you're working on highly specific, almost one-off pieces, and then Emmanuel, you had mentioned that there's issues of co-option of the product that you have created. So how have you dealt with issues around intellectual property and ownership of this when you have found co-option happening out there in the world?
I'll let you take that one because I think it's a little bit more up your alley. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
What the product is. Yeah.
Well, when we started the company, I think we received some really good advice. I mean, we were, grad school kids, but someone said, hey, you should file a patent. And we did. So we had a patent very early on for our first honeycomb technology, and it was useful. I mean, we had 2 companies try to rip us off fairly early on and try to make similar panels, and the patent protected us. Patents aren't the only way to be protected, though. I think in some ways, competition just forces you to be better and more innovative. And so in terms of intellectual property for us, it's always been a mix of, okay, do we try to get a patent on this, or, do we rely on just the know-how that we have? For example, our facade panel, one of the things that protects us is that we've been working with Lawrence Berkeley Labs for, gosh, I guess about 7 years now. And we've gone so deep in performance data and testing that actually gives us a competitive advantage, just because the technology is so, we've really gone down the rabbit hole with it. So, but even there, we're looking to patent some of our products. We had, I think I mentioned to you, we had a competitor literally just lift text off our website and put it on theirs. And that was, that was kind of like, wow, people are really mean. You just have this realization, like sometimes you do everything you can to protect yourself, and people are still gonna try to find ways around it. And it feels frightening and frustrating at the time, but we just kind of come back to this idea that if we just focus on being the best at what we do, it'll work out. And it's not without challenges, but that's been our approach.
In addition to the management piece that you both spoke to, are there other kinds of challenges that you faced as, I hate to say a woman-owned business, but a business that often is occupying a space where there aren't that many women doing the work that you're doing? Have there been other kinds of challenges that you've encountered over time?
I think that's something that we had touched upon too, is that maybe there's a stronger pressure to be the best at what we do. I feel like I just want, every time I walk into a room, I want to, be able to talk the talk. I want to be able to talk shop, because often I am the only female in the room in terms of, like, I'm a fabrication company and we're with, all these different prop special effects companies, and they're all Hollywood companies, have been around forever, and then they're all male run, and I just have to be able to talk shop. And then they're like, oh shit, she knows what she's talking about. And so that's maybe I put a little bit more pressure on myself to be able to stand up like that in those situations. But that's the main challenge I've faced, I think.
Yeah, I can relate to that, Julie. I think when if you're confident in what you're talking about, it goes a long way. I also just think, entrepreneurship is pretty challenging. I I don't know if it's been more challenging for me as a woman. I just don't know, honestly. I never really thought about it all that much. I think, like Elizabeth said, I don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, I'm a woman going about my day. Just, you know, doing my thing. And yeah, I don't necessarily know that I've experienced specific challenges around that, but I will say that I now see some opportunities because, you know, we're actually just now applying for our woman-owned certification, but there's so many opportunities around that, just having that certification. And there are so many wonderful organizations like this one where, you know, where we can reach out for solidarity and advice and support. And I'm really grateful for that.
That was something I was going to just say too, is that there are so many benefits as well. And so, I mean, this group here and the support that females give to each other is incredible. And we really truly want to see each other succeed. And that's really special. So there's definitely a lot of positive things I've found from this. And I think also more recently, as females are starting to connect more and organizations are starting to come up, and it's really nice, actually. It's good.
That's so great to hear. And I think definitely, I mean, there's clearly an energy and a building of solidarity over the last many years, which I think is hopefully going to continue for a very long time. There's so much work to do. But I think these spaces are critical for us to be able to create connections and build greater solidarity. So I think these kinds of moments and organizations are critically needed. To pivot just a little bit, you both had kind of in reflection, thinking about this event, the fact that it's celebrating founders, and you both had talked a little bit about what you would do differently. And I was just wondering if you would be willing to share a little bit of that. So if it's not what you'd do differently, but what kind of advice would you give to those who are contemplating going out on their own and starting something in a similar spirit as you both have done?
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier is, let's see, trust your gut, trust your instinct, trust yourself. Reach out to people, make connections, and don't be shy. And delegate and trust your team. Those are my 3 things. Yeah.
I really agree, especially with, you know, learning to trust your gut and really tuning into it, I think is so important. And trusting your team as well. I think what I would add is, you know, don't give up. Just don't give up, because there are going to be a lot of hard moments. And sometimes if I'm having a really, really hard day, I just think, why don't you just see what happens if you don't give up? Just see what happens. Just don't give up one more time and see how far you can get. And if you don't give up, you know, enough times, you keep going. And Kate made a really wonderful comment earlier in the chat about resilience, and that resilience can take you really a long way. And sometimes it's just as simple as doing the one next thing and just not giving up one more time. But the other thing I would say is really, don't forget to advocate for yourself. There's something I think we tend to do. I don't really love gender stereotypes, but this one I think is kind of true, that women often tend to put others before themselves. And I know that over the course of my career, I've often put in more work than others, paid myself less than others, prioritized others, needs. And I've always just given. And in many ways I've done it because I love what I do and I love my team and I want everything to go well. And I just think that shifts a little bit, especially, once you get a little older or once you have a child and you start thinking, wait, if I keep sacrificing myself, I'm actually also sacrificing for these people who mean so much to me. So I think that's something to really, just really be careful of. Remember to advocate for yourself. And I would bet that you deserve more than you think you deserve to.
100%. I think that loops us back around too about the idea of putting your own your own oxygen mask on first. And that's what I wish I had done differently from the beginning. It took me so long to learn that, and I'm still learning that every day. And I still have to remind myself of that every day, both professionally and personally, that you have to do that. Otherwise you cannot show up for anybody else. And that idea of that I would have done that differently from the beginning. I would have taken weekends off, taken a day off, taken an afternoon off occasionally, and then you just come in stronger, more decisive, clear-headed. And I nearly burnt myself out multiple times in the first 10 years, probably.
So important to hear that, because I think, our education trains us for precisely what you just said. And so, I mean, from where I sit, trying to change the way students are educated becomes a first step to trying to then have that percolate up as they move through their education and out into practice, whatever practice they choose to pursue. So I think that how you respect your body, respect your time, respect yourself is so critical in having both success and longevity in whatever you choose to do. That you both have mentioned having a child or children, and if you're willing, I really enjoyed our conversation from earlier when we were getting to know each other a little bit. If you would just talk a little bit about how becoming a mother has changed the way you do what you do. And I know you both had mentioned there are struggles that you're still working through, but how, if you'd be willing to share that, I think people would very much be interested in hearing from you.
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Sure. Well, motherhood changed a number of things for me. I mean, it forced me to work less, for one thing, which was probably good for me, no doubt good for me. I mean, at Panelite, our culture is very family friendly, which, it was already before I had a child, but I just feel very much, I feel very flexible when it comes to our team. I don't really, if people are getting their work done, it doesn't matter to me when or how exactly. So if they need to go take care of their child, or if they need to take some time like that, it all works out. That's fine. And I think the fact that we're all so, we're very open with each other about those things, I think is great. And actually one of my team members who is a man, is the one who's like, he's first in line if his daughter's sick. He's the one who goes to get his daughter. And that brings me to, one of the things I learned when I had a child. I felt like I had never, I'm sure I experienced sexism in ways that I didn't even realize, going through school and the early part of my career, but it only really hit me once I had a child, because that's when all of the kind of social expectations of who's the person who's going to do the majority of the work. Suddenly I was like, in the 50s or something, and it fell to me mostly. So that was, I'm just being very honest here. Because I appreciated so much Heidi and Elizabeth's honesty, and I think it helps when we share our stories. So if anything, that was, when I really struggled with gender roles. But in general, I think it's just incredibly, it's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. I'm still trying to figure it out. I still feel like I have to choose between my career and my child sometimes, but you make it work. And yeah, I mean, the females always default no matter what, no matter how progressive your partner is, the moms default majority of the time. And you just have to take your space, and you have to rely on your team and the people around you. And but again, it forces you to take that time for yourself in a way. Spending time with my daughter, and she's still pretty young. So like, she was born, dealt with that, and the pandemic hit. It's like all these things happened one after the other that were just like, you gotta slow down, you gotta slow down. And I was fortunate enough at least to have my own company and be able to do that. And again, yeah, it teaches you. And I think all the ways that we're working now are teaching us, and someone brought it up in the first session, is schedule doesn't necessarily matter. You get your stuff done. If someone's heart is in it and they're passionate about what they do, they're going to get the work done no matter what. And you need to be flexible with people's lives. I don't know how anybody does it. I don't know anybody just has a 9 to 5 and gets anything done during the week. So somehow we just figure it out. So I'm still figuring it out with that and making it work. She just almost busted in here. So I was like, case in point. And then I was pushed her out the door.
So has COVID, as it intersects with both of your work and life, created additional opportunities that further enhance your thinking and policy making for your companies because of the needs to accommodate, and not only yourselves, but then also your employees? Like, do you see this as a positive in the way that it's allowed you to potentially evolve your work practices and your work commitments with your employees?
I think for me, it's been positive because I've been able to had to work remotely. But what's interesting about my companies, we're very hands-on. We have a working shop, a very large working facility that a lot of things are hands-on. We're not solely digital. There's some digital work, but people go in every day and you're building things, you're using the equipment, you're hands-on. So we're more flexible, but we still have to, we still had to really make it work during the past couple of years. And luckily we have a large enough facility and we wear masks all day anyways when you're hands-on, so we made it work. But what's been interesting about it too is that I think the client relationships and the way that we communicate with clients has changed. Like, we're doing this all day long now. We're taking Zooms all day long. Whereas before I felt like I had to be in the hub of Los Angeles. I had to be like in the center of Los Angeles to be able to take client meetings. That was super important. But the cost of being in central Los Angeles is very, very costly. I mean, we're still pretty centrally located, but now I feel like, as a lot of companies are experiencing, you can almost operate from any location. And a lot of things are digital. So that's been an interesting shift for us in terms of like the client relationships and how we share information. And we've been using a lot of almost like AR experiences and virtual reality experiences in terms of immersing yourself in sculptural works or environments in terms of how to communicate.
Mhm.
So that's slowly shifting, bringing new technologies to the forefront.
And were you already underway in that process and then COVID just kind of pushed it further?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
For us, I think COVID has been a really good thing, actually. I mean, we have an office where we can meet if we need to, but I've just been checking in with the team ever since, you know, just even the potential of going back to work has been available, and everyone is really grateful for the work-life balance that working remotely offers them. You know, it just gives you so much more flexibility, which is something I really have been enjoying as well. So as long as we're able to meet effectively online, in person occasionally, but mostly online, I think it's been really good for everyone's mental health. I mean, it's an odd thing to say because the pandemic has not been good for anyone's mental health, but I think the personal flexibility that it's given us has been beneficial. And then it enabled me to start a new project as well, because something about just the immediacy of talking to people on Zoom. I had joined the board of the LA Forum for Architecture and Urban Design just shortly before COVID, well, about a year before. And for the forum, I'm launching a podcast, and the idea for the podcast really came about through the sudden ease of talking to people on Zoom. And I started to interview people about the city and just interview people about the 5 places that define the city for them. Just 5 places, and interviewing as broad a number of people as possible, not just architects, people from all different backgrounds, walks of life, genders, ages. It's as diverse as possible. And that has been incredibly rewarding and interesting and fun. And that's something that I don't think would have come about as easily if I hadn't just thought, oh, it's so easy to just connect with someone this way, you know?
You know, it's so interesting to hear how your work structures have changed and adapted, both because of motherhood and now because of COVID. And then thinking about Heidi and Elizabeth's work parameters and the way they've also been able to figure out ways that best support themselves in their work, their workspaces and their work lives too. So it's really fascinating to see here's four different women doing different types of work who've been able to negotiate and create and craft different types of work environments. And I mean that in terms of structures of how and when you do your work. So I think I hope it is only like at the beginning of this impacting everyone as we move forward in whatever, I don't know if we say post-COVID, but learning to live with COVID and how it hopefully will weaken over time, that these practices continue and hybridity becomes or remains the norm in our work lives. Because I do think it allows and opens up so many other types of opportunities. I'm on the East Coast right now, but there's no space, there's no distance between us. So I think there's so many things that this interface offers us. Sorry if you hear a squeaky toy, it's our dog in the background, sorry. We have just a few more minutes before we open it up for questions. I don't know if there's any last thoughts you'd like to share with the audience, but I welcome you to do so.
I just want to say thank you for the event, and nice to see you all, and thanks so much for having me here.
Yes, thanks so much to AWA and to all of you. And I see so many other, inspiring women here, and I'm so grateful for all of you and for the solidarity Oh.
All right. Well, thank you both for being in conversation. And please post your questions in the chat. I already have a few that I will begin to read. The first is one for Elizabeth, if she is still here, because I know I'm going to ask it. She was asking, how can architects help mitigate impacts in our communities? And do you think our skill sets create opportunities to liaise between community and the city and profession? And that was from Tracy Stone. And if she is not there, I will welcome the other panelists also to respond.
Sounds like we don't have our, could you just repeat the question one more time, Lauren?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, how can architects help to mitigate, we were talking about impacts that were around inequities and issues of representation on our communities. And do you think our skill sets create opportunities to liaise between the community and the city and profession more broadly?
I'd say absolutely. I think we, like Emmanuel said, right? Just wanting to work in the built environment and improve the lives of other people. I think that's probably at the core of why a lot of us are doing the work that we're doing. So any way that we can be a voice for the community, bring them in to the process when we can through stakeholder engagement. But when that's not possible, at least advocate on their behalf. Everything is so interlinked with sustainability, right? So if you do something around resiliency, like advocate for your project to be a cooling center in case of emergency, or have renewable energy so that it can have some power, so that people can come and cook at the project, or to provide green space in a neighborhood that really needs it. So I think anything that we can do on our projects to even further enhance the built environment, and to really understand the communities and what's needed, right? And so that outreach piece is really important, rather than just assuming what's needed for a particular neighborhood. Really, capturing their voice as much as you can is extremely impactful.
We occasionally work on public art projects in the art realm or in the sculpture realm, working alongside architects and developers. And I think it's really important to engage like the local artists in the community, and then they have a voice, and the art pieces can really speak for the local community. And in that way, it's a visual representation of the location. So I find those projects extremely rewarding, because especially like in Los Angeles, there's so many pocket communities that have such unique cultures, and being able to capture that in a permanent public art installation is really special.
Another question from Meg was asking, thinking about how these two conversations are juxtaposed with one another, how does Emmanuel and Julie incorporate sustainability in their companies?
Well, Panelite was pretty much founded on sustainability before it was such a huge topic, honestly. I mean, in 1998, I don't think it was, there were plenty of people who were already working on it, but it didn't seem to be talked about as much. Even though we use some elements of plastic in our products, which is something I still struggle with, and I'm really looking forward to bioplastics being really a viable solution. But we've always been focused on using a very minimal amount of material. So, our interior panels are 80% air, because the honeycomb structures that we use are so lightweight and so strong that we only need very minimal facings, and then you get a super strong panel that's made of actually very little material. And we work also with recycled content in our cores and in our facings. And then our exterior facade panel is the one that we're really developing now in terms of sustainability, because we're using honeycomb as a daylighting optimizer, essentially. So it diffuses daylight so that you have ample daylight without glare, and it blocks solar heat. So it's almost like a light shade and a shading device all at the same time. And we've been working, as I mentioned earlier, with Lawrence Berkeley National Labs on really understanding the performance. It has a fairly complex performance profile because the honeycomb is 3D. And so it's not, you don't just have one number for solar heat gain, or, it's all of these numbers change over time as the angle of the sun changes. So it's been very exciting to develop that product and not just understand its performance now, but also understand how we can improve it so that it's even more sustainable in terms of energy savings, daylight optimization, user well-being. That's the path we're actively and happily pursuing right now.
Fantastic. There's another question for all of you. If you'd be willing to share your best opportunities you have received because you are either a woman and or a mother.
Oh,
I'm not quite sure about that one. So the best opportunities you receive because either a woman or a mother. I would say that that opportunities come along to bond with other women also that are mothers or other business owners that are also women, and create a lot of opportunities there. I can't think of anything specifically, but I think in general, the bond that we build between women is really important. And then sometimes I'll be in a meeting and you can commiserate or like bond over that. And so that opens up a lot of bridges for you. Opens up opportunities.
I agree. Events like this
Yeah.
yes.
are the best benefit of.
And also all the opportunities for women-owned businesses, the programs that are in place for women-owned businesses, I think are pretty great, and I'm looking forward to delving deeper there. Also,
So
not to talk
if
about.
I could also add something there to your opportunities for women-owned businesses. Ginger is on the call, and some of us remember before the state of California eliminated affirmative action kinds of goals in state contracts and other limitations. I can definitely remember calling a school district and asking, I hear you passed a bond. I'd like to come and meet with you. Can we get together and I'd love to do a school for you? And being told by the head of facilities that they've been working with the same architect for 40 years and they didn't see any need to change that. And I was in a pissy mood, so I said, well, I kind of suspect that 40 years ago there weren't any women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses. I mean, I wasn't going to get a job from this guy, so it didn't really matter. I was just having a good time. And, affirmative action, Ginger will testify that being able to win major contracts with Metro for subway station design, both simultaneously damn near killed us because they didn't pay timely and all kinds of other problems, but they gave us the opportunity to partner with major engineering firms and do big projects and grow differently. And I think that there is still a need for opening doors, that maybe it's more minority architectural firms and minority presence, but I think that affirmatively reaching out and building diversity, inclusion, and equity is still a responsibility that touches on women as well.
Kate,
And I got some job opportunities because I was a woman-owned business, and I'd be the first to say thank you.
yes, and Kate, I have to echo what you're saying. As I was hearing more than once, oh, there's so many opportunities now. I was there as you were when the real amount of opportunities went almost to zero, essentially to zero.
Yep.
My whole practice had to change. And we had, I think, 27 people working for us at the time. And, you know, it was very, very hard to take. I actually think, without eating up too much time, it's something we ought to bring back again when it's possible. It would be worth our effort to push on that.
You know, the challenge of standing up in front of developer clients and saying, you should trust me with your high-rise building, or you should trust me with the biggest investment you've ever made, and the developer has never seen a woman in that space, role models and doors and kind of the trust inherent. People, we all choose communities that we are comfortable with. And I think there are still plenty of communities that haven't figured out how to be comfortable with women. And I can't tell you how many times I've been told that I'm too bossy, or I'm too assertive, or I'm too this, or I'm too that, and no man wants to work with me. And then when I leave the company, 3 of the men follow me to the next place. Apparently they did want to work with me. You know, I heard that and I love Elizabeth, and I knew her father and her mother, and I wish she were here. But it's not waking up every morning and going, oh, woe is me, I'm a woman and I have constraints. But you cannot walk into a room and not be a woman.
That's right.
And the unspoken prejudices of the people that you're interacting with are there in the room with you. And back in the days when consciousness raising was first being discussed, before it was being, you know, let's not talk about feminism, we have a little bit of work to do to re-raise feminism.
Yeah.
A certain candidate lost the presidency because too many men and women couldn't vote for a woman president.
That's right.
We have another question in the chat, and this is a really important conversation that's ensuing, but I also want to give space to others to participate.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a question to all the panelists: do you have or do a practice, a hobby, a sport, or some sort of interest that gives you strength and helps you to overcome your work and life challenges?
I would immediately chime in and say traveling, getting out and about and seeing different places and people, and that just does it all for me. Just seeing, being recharged, inspired, all of the above.
Being out in nature, hiking, biking, being at the beach, that definitely
And being bossy.
revitalized me.
For me, it's skateboarding. That has literally changed my life, you know. Yeah. I also want to acknowledge, I'm just thinking about what Kate just said. You know, I said earlier that I didn't feel that I'd experienced all that much sexism in my career. I think I probably experienced some in ways I didn't even realize. But I also think that, you know, I mean, I'm a middle-class privileged white woman too. So there's that. So my experience.
There is no question that we are privileged. And
Yeah.
COVID has proven how privileged many of us are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't, you know, I can still remember an important architect in the city of Los Angeles in the middle of an Arab holiday party saying to me, "You are only succeeding because of affirmative action, and you only get work because of this." And I'd had enough to drink that I said, "Listen, if you're a failing middle-aged architect who isn't getting the work you want, that's your damn problem. I'm not talking to you anymore." And we didn't talk for 10 years. You must realize that underneath the cover of lots of other pieces, there are some serious challenges. And the balance of being a mother only exacerbates that. And I've not done that. And I think I would probably abandon children and forget them someplace and be a dreadful mother. But I think that time for us to accept that the personal is also political.
Yes.
And go back to that modality of it, analyzing that.
So I want to close the conversation because we're coming on time, but I also want to really underscore, Kate, what you were talking about. And I think whether a woman has faced or experienced sexism or challenges doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think there's still so much work to be done. And so spaces like this, like I mentioned, are critical to create more empowerment among all of us. I know personally, it's because of spaces like this that I've been able to be successful and further connect with other women. And I just am honored and very thankful to be a part of this tonight, and hope that I will see many of you moving forward in other circles, hopefully in person at some point. But I think, we've heard such amazing stories from these 4 women, very different, but yet intersecting. And we still have so much work to do to reach equity. And I think, how the calls for diversity, equity, inclusion, bring in women's voices and women's experiences are something we have to be more centered on as we move forward, and help to raise all boats, that our work improves the life and health and safety of all. When we're looking at feminist issues, it's a very large umbrella that this work falls within. So I just want to thank all of the panelists, and I really, really am honored that you were willing to share with us tonight. And I want to turn it back over to Sonia. So thank you very much for this wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Lori. Really, really amazing conversations. Thank you so much for leading those. And thank you to our speakers for having inspiring us this evening and giving us a lot to think about, and really all these important conversations. I also wanted to thank our programs team and our 100-year team for putting this event together, as well as Laura Ballantyne and Make Coffee for being the co-chairs of this event. Before we let you go, I wanted to share some events that are coming up. I'm going to paste a few links in the chat that you'll see they're kind of related to what I'm going to list. On March 3rd, we are going to have a Isagoria member slide presentation where our members will showcase their work. So if you're a member, please join and present. If you're not a member, you can still join and listen, or become a member and join and present. On March 8th, which is the International Women's Day, we have an event called Interview Skills. Join us so you can hear best practices, do's and don'ts of interview process. On March 10th, we have an event with our partner, USGBC LA, to discuss 6 case studies of sustainable multifamily residential projects. On March 19th, we have an in-person tour of Stoneview Nature Center project. And on March 26th, we also have an in-person tour of the new Apple store in downtown. On April 13th, we will host an event on negotiation skills, which is very important. Our symposium is in planning right now, and it is going to be, as you know, it's our biggest event of the year. It's going to be even bigger this year, and it's going to be in June. So just check our website for updates on that. And AWAF scholarships and fellowships are ready to be applied. So one of the links is for that. And then lastly, as one of the 100-year big events, we have a maker challenge that you can also apply to or share to your community to apply to. To sign up for these events, you can either scan the code on this screen or go to awaplus.org/events, which the chat also has the link. And that's it. I thank everyone again, and I hope that you join us at the next event. Thanks, everyone.
Can we have a group photo before we leave?
Of course.
Great. Okay, everybody turn on their video.